We're joined now by Melanie Sloan of Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, who is leading a petition asking President Obama to fix the Federal Election Commission. Melanie Sloan, how is the Federal Election Commission broken?
The Federal Election Commission is made up of 6 commissioners, 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. And the commission in recent years has refused to act on almost anything. 5 of the 6 commissioners are sitting despite expired terms, and it is up to President Obama to nominate new commissioners. But ever since one failed nomination in 2009, he actually just hasn't done it.
And what is the actual original purpose of the Federal Election Commission? Let's kind of explain what the job of the FEC is to people out there who don't know this government agency.
This is one of the most important government agencies that Americans don't know about. The FEC was created post-Watergate to deal with particularly presidential campaign finances, and now it also deals with all congressional finances. And it monitors our campaigns, how our campaigns are run with the finances. All expenditures and contributions are reported to the Federal Election Commission by candidates, and they're supposed to monitor and make sure that everybody plays by the same rules. And they're doing a lousy job of it, frankly, particularly in light of a decision a couple of years ago called Citizens United, which has really changed the landscape of campaign finance across America. And we're seeing just millions and millions of dollars. This presidential election will undoubtedly run to over $1 billion because of all the money pouring in. And the FEC, the agency charged with monitoring all of this, is basically just sitting it out.
We have still here for the history of the Federal Election Commission. It was created by Congress in 1975. It's an independent regulatory agency disclosing campaign finance information. But it also has sort of an enforcement arm that I want you to talk a little bit about as well. The enforcement to enforce limits and prohibitions on contributions. Talk a little bit about the sort of judicial role, I guess, of the FEC here.
Sure. The FEC is supposed to enforce our campaign finance laws. So there are contribution limits. There are contribution limits that can be made to candidates, and there are contribution limits made to political action committees. And all of these things are supposed to be monitored by the FEC. And when campaigns or when candidates violate the rules, the FEC is supposed to step in and enforce the law. And groups like mine, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, routinely file complaints with the Federal Election Commission against candidates who have violated the rules. And it's the FEC's job to investigate and then enforce the law. But we've seen recently that they're just entirely refusing to enforce the law. One of the problems with the commission is that it's made of 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans, and yet you need 4 votes in order to accomplish anything. And so what we often see is a partisan deadlock, 3-3.
Again, we're with Melanie Sloan for Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. We're going to do the phone lines standard this time. Republicans can call in on 202-737-0002. Democrats, 202-737-0001. Independents, 202-628-0205. And if you're outside the United States, 202-628-0184. And Melanie Sloan, you talked about that some of the commissioners of the FEC's terms are expired. How are they still able to serve if their terms are expired, and why hasn't there been an appointment of people to replace them?
Well, they're allowed to serve until their replacements come in, and there have been no replacements even nominated. And this is something that we're very critical of President Obama for. There have been a lot of problems in campaign finance, and clearly, the Citizens United decision has changed the landscape dramatically and much for the worse. It's also a problem that Congress has refused to pass any campaign finance legislation. But President Obama came in on a pledge of campaign finance reform, and he really hasn't followed through. So CREW, along with a bunch of other groups, including Democracy 21, Common Cause, Public Campaign, the Campaign Legal Center, and Public Citizen, have all been pushing this petition. The White House has set up a petition process whereby if you can get 25,000 signatures on a White House petition, the president will respond to your question. So we've put together a petition asking the president why he hasn't nominated new FEC commissioners and asking him to do so.
And talk a little bit about the Citizens United decision. You're very critical of that decision. There's people out there that say that more money can help more people get involved in politics. It can get the message out to more people, and more people will see campaign ads. Is it not getting more people involved in going to the polls on Election Day?
I don't think too many Americans feel like they are not seeing enough negative campaign ads.
Okay.
I imagine, and the closer we get to the election, the more they'll be seeing. But what really this has allowed is people with the most money to have the most speech. We're seeing, for example, Sheldon Adelson and his wife Miriam Adelson contribute $10 million to a super PAC run for Newt Gingrich, Winning Our Future. And that has basically allowed Newt Gingrich to stay in the race. It used to be that candidates needed to get money from small donors across the country in order to show that they had some support for a presidential election. And yet here, Mr. Gingrich, his candidate committee has really brought in almost no money, so he doesn't have that kind of support. And that lack of support would generally force somebody to drop out of the race. And yet Mr. Gingrich, thanks to this $10 million, for example, is still in the race. So what we're really seeing is the Citizens United decision isn't allowing just more people to get in. It's allowing billionaires and multimillionaires to have much more influence in the race.
I want to get your reaction to a story on the front page of the New York Times this morning. The headline, Obama yields in marshaling of super PAC. This is by Jeff Zelny and Jim Ruttenberg. President Obama is signaling to wealthy Democratic donors that he wants outside groups supporting his reelection, reversing a long-held position as he confronts deep financial disadvantages on a vital front in the campaign. Aides said that the president had signed off on a plan to dispatch cabinet officials, senior advisors at the White House, and top campaign staff members to make clear to donors that they should support Priorities USA Action, the leading Democratic super PAC, whose fundraising has been dwarfed by Republican groups. The new policy was presented to the campaign's National Finance Committee in a call Monday evening and was set to be announced today. We're not going to fight this fight with one hand tied behind our back, said Jim Messina, the manager of Mr. Obama's reelection campaign. Does this article particularly concern you because the Obama campaign has been not supportive of taking money from some of these PACs in the past?
Well, in his first election, Mr. Obama was very critical of independent expenditures and didn't want to see that kind of money spent on his campaign. I think he also wanted to control his own message. But this election cycle, we are seeing so much money pouring into Restore Our Future, Mitt Romney's super PAC, and we are seeing so much into Newt Gingrich's super PAC, Winning Our Future, and then there's the one Karl Rove has, American Crossroads. And given that huge influx of money, it's really understandable that President Obama, as critical as he's been of super PACs, would finally concede that if he doesn't take the money for the super PACs, he'll be at a serious competitive disadvantage.
Let's go to Gary on the Republicans line from St. Louis, Missouri. You're the first caller on this segment for a discussion about the FEC.
It seems like with all the money that pours in, the little man doesn't have a chance. It's just whoever wants to buy an election with the source money and things like that. What about Acorn? How is that? Talk about that.
Well, I agree with you that the regular person has really been sidetracked in this whole nomination process, and we're seeing the same thing in congressional elections. Now we're seeing independent expenditures made by these super PACs on behalf of congressional candidates as well, and I think this is a major problem. Congressmen and congresswomen are now much more concerned with special interests than they are with the interests of regular Americans. And I think that is because they are constantly raising campaign dollars, constantly worried about the negative ad that'll be run against them. And the money is really totally overpowering our political system.
James on Twitter writes, I have an easy solution, abolish the FEC. Is that possible to abolish the FEC?
You know, Senator John McCain calls the FEC the little agency that can't. It's really been a disaster. The formation of it was a good idea, but the fact is the way it is currently constituted with 3 commissioners, Republican, and 3 Democrats, means that they can really get almost nothing done. And I think it is time to consider abolishing the FEC and starting over with a new kind of system that would better enforce our campaign finance laws. And
wasn't the commission number set up, though, so one party couldn't punish the other to force them to make decisions in a bipartisan fashion, and that just hasn't happened?
Right, and that did work until 2009. And then at that time, Senator Mitch McConnell, the minority leader, had appointed several Republican commissioners who have said flat out that they don't believe in enforcing campaign finance law. They're led by Don McGahn, who's Tom DeLay's former campaign finance lawyer. And Mr. McGahn has said both that he doesn't believe in campaign finance regulations, won't enforce them, and that he also believes that his job on the commission is to help Republicans. So that's really not the kind of position we want somebody who's supposed to be enforcing campaign finance laws to take.
A few facts we have on the FEC commissioners themselves. No more than 3 can represent the same political party. They are appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and at least 4 votes are required for any official commission action. Back to the phones. Tanya is on the Democrats line from Hayward, California. Good morning.
Oh, good morning. That was an interesting information that she just gave to us. And my thing is that people who say they hate government and that government is too big, why are they in government? And all that they do is destroy those things that are supposed to help us, and then they turn around and say, see, government doesn't work because you were in there destroying it. And one last thing is that I feel like America, if you don't understand what the unions were for, this race to the bottom is going to destroy us. Talking about being envious of money that the rich have, you won't get any money.
Tanya from Hayward, California.
I think the caller may have been responding a little more to your earlier presentation.
Let's go right to Warren on the Independence line from Newark, Delaware. Good morning.
Good morning. I'd like to say the Democrats are not as less of the evil as the Republicans. It seems like the Republicans does everything for the rich and then says it's going to trickle down, which is not. Say, for instance, all the money they accumulated from the year, all the profits they made, they're not spending that money investing in America.
Warren, are you concerned about the Federal Election Commission and money in campaigns?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just speaking about the economy.
Okay, that's all right. Let's go right to Daryl from Rock Hill, South Carolina. Good morning.
Yes, sir. Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. The question for the lady that you have there as a guest, who came up with this idea of super PACs? I mean, why isn't there some way that you can level the playing field, even by Congress, that if someone does get on the ballot and starts running for president, that they're allotted so much money, and then everyone is level on this so-called playing field, and then we can go by the substance of what they believe in rather than all this money pouring in for people. I mean, even if Romney didn't get any, I mean, he made $21 million last year. Certainly he's going to do better than someone like Rick Santorum, who I believe has a good platform.
On the creation of super PACs.
Well, I think you're right about that. I think that the money pouring into the system is a problem, and it does mean that some of the substance of people's views is lost because it's so overpowered by the negative ads, particularly that are run. I think you can really hold the Supreme Court responsible for this in the Citizens United decision of 2 years ago that really unleashed this torrent of money into our campaign system. In that decision, the Supreme Court held that independent expenditures, which are basically money spent on ads, as long as they're not coordinated with the candidates, there can be unlimited amounts of money spent by on that. And it used to be that unions and corporations weren't allowed to use their treasury money to run such ads, and now they are. And that's what you're seeing, and that's what's really going to influence our 2012 election so much.
Some information again from that New York Times piece today on super PACs, talking about the FEC reports that came in on funding from last year that these super PACs raised. It says 2 groups that were formed with help from the Republican strategist Karl Rove, American Crossroads and Crossroads GPS, raised $51 million between them last year for the congressional and presidential races. Groups supporting specific Republican presidential candidates brought in roughly $40 million, including $30 million for the group backing Mitt Romney. But the major Democratic groups, including Priorities USA, Action, which we talked about earlier, raised only $19 million for the year. Those lopsided figures led Mr. Messina to send his top network of donors an email last week urging them to raise more money. Back to the phones. Gary is from Sarasota, Florida, on the Democrats line. Good morning.
Good morning. Could you comment on the status of the investigation into our Representative Vern Buchanan? And secondarily, is there any investigation into the election irregularities here in our district? I mean, they lose 18,000 votes here, and supervisor of elections just writes it off as another day at the office.
Well, certainly you've had more than your share of problems in Florida, and Congressman Vern Buchanan was the subject of a Federal Election Commission investigation, and it was in fact thanks to a complaint that Crew had filed based on information down in Florida that Mr. Buchanan was reimbursing employees at his car dealership for contributions made to him. The FEC has recently closed that matter, but it has been referred to the Department of Justice, which is engaged in a criminal investigation of Mr. Buchanan. And yesterday, the Office of Congressional Ethics issued a report on Mr. Buchanan, also indicating that he had failed to properly include information on his financial disclosure reports, and there's going to be further investigation on that. So Mr. Buchanan remains under a serious cloud and merits a lot of scrutiny.
And what are the penalties that the Federal Election Commission could hit a candidate with? I mean, you're talking about referring to the Justice Department or a congressional ethics investigation. Is it just fines that the FEC can levy against campaigns?
The FEC can just levy fines, and the penalties can be severe, although often they're not. And the FEC can, if the campaign finance violation is criminal, refer the matter to the Department of Justice for prosecution. One of the criticisms of the FEC is that so frequently its enforcement procedures take so long that by the time they get around to doing anything, the campaign is long over. And in fact, you could violate campaign finance laws willy-nilly and then become a senator, say, having used illegal money, and then simply have to pay some minor fine in the end. And in fact, you can use your campaign finance, the money you raise for your candidate committee, you can use to pay your fine.
So there are examples of current members paying fines for campaigns that they ran long ago?
I don't think I can think of anybody who's currently paying a fine for something they ran long ago. But again, the fines aren't really significant enough often to be a serious deterrent against people engaging in misconduct.
Well, you're asking the president to fix the FEC. Is there a will in Congress to look at the FEC and go through some of these issues that you raised?
There's really no will in Congress. The Republicans in Congress, led by Mitch McConnell, are firmly against any kind of campaign finance regulation. They'll say that quite publicly. The Democrats have talked about being in favor of campaign finance regulations, and in fact, in the last Congress, tried to pass a law called the Disclose Act, which would have required more disclosure. One of the problems we're seeing with these super PACs and 501c4 organizations that are also getting involved in our elections is we don't really know who's behind some of the ads we're seeing. They're always run by groups that have innocuous names like Restore Our Future or Winning Our Future, but we really don't know who the money is. The Disclose Act would have required more disclosure so Americans could weigh these ads in context, but that fell by the wayside. So really there's no move at this point in Congress to regulate campaign finances.
Again, we're talking with Melanie Sloan of Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. Melanie Sloan was a former assistant U.S. attorney in the District of Columbia from 1998 till 2003 and served on the House Judiciary Committee under then-ranking member John Conyers as a counsel on the Judiciary Committee. Ralph is a Republican from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Good morning.
Hello.
Go ahead, Ralph.
I have a comment. I mean, you can sit here and argue about the votes, and they set it up so that it'll never, like the FCC will never get anything done. But with these black box bold voting machines, what happens is all the votes go to Spain first to begin with. The counting is done in another country. Now, I don't understand how you can enforce anything that's being counted in another country and then sent back to here. Can you comment on that?
I'm really not so familiar with voting machines, but it's been my understanding that votes are counted here in America.
What issues have you brought up about the counting procedures through the FEC? Do you have any complaints that you've raised through the FEC on those?
The FEC doesn't regulate that kind of information. Okay. The FEC really regulates campaign finance issues, and there are other organizations.
So the balloting that he's talking about, where does that go through?
That would go through the Department of Justice.
Okay. Back to the phones. Long Island, New York. Kevin is on the Independence line. Good morning.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call. In New York City, I participated in an event called Occupy the Courts, which was about Citizens United versus FEC. And one of the things being chanted by people from Occupy Wall Street was, money is not free speech. So my question is basically, do you think that the only way to get a redress of grievances now in America, this America, is through the streets? Thank you.
Well, you know, there is a movement, in fact, to have a constitutional amendment to make it clear that money is not free speech and that corporations are not people and they don't have the same free speech rights as every other citizen here in America. I think that the Occupy movements have made one of the issues that they've brought to light is the problem of money in politics. And I've heard both in New York and here in Washington, D.C., my office is near McPherson Square, where you could see tents that talked about the problem with money in politics. So I think this is an important issue, and I think it's one that most Americans really, sadly, are just not so aware of. I think we can really thank Stephen Colbert and Trevor Potter from the Campaign Legal Center, who has appeared on the Colbert Show to talk routinely about super PACs and the problem of money in politics. But I think this is an issue Americans really need to educate themselves about, because any issue that you care about in America, whether it's the environment or children's health, whatever it is being incredibly influenced by the amount of money that is going into our political system. Special interests are really ruling the airwaves, and they are helping to pick our candidates much more than we the people are.
You bring up Stephen Colbert. Here's an article from The Hill talking about his super PAC that he created, raising more than $1 million. What has Stephen Colbert done to sort of bring this issue to the forefront, and do you think it's been helpful?
I do think it's been incredibly helpful. What Mr. Colbert has done is created his own super PAC, Americans for a Better Tomorrow. And he has had Trevor Potter come on, and Trevor Potter used to be a commissioner at the Federal Election Commission, and he also was John McCain's campaign finance lawyer and is still the head of the Campaign Legal Center. And they have gone through and explained to Americans in a way that's easy for them to understand exactly what a super PAC can do. And then Mr. Colbert has brought in Jon Stewart when he transferred the super PAC to Mr. Stewart. The two of them have fought over control of it. And basically, Mr. Colbert has explained that there's this unlimited bottomless pit of money that can be brought into our political system, and it's unregulated.
Back to the phones. John is on the Republicans line from Statesville, North Carolina. Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, I'd like to know your opinion on it. In my opinion, the Democrats, they have some free super PACs, such as CNN, ABC, NBC, MSNBC. 90% of the news media is free super PAC for the Democrats. And, of course, the unions funnel money back to the Democrats. All this is free. It doesn't cost the Democrats a dime. It costs the American public. So the Republicans have got to have some kind of counter individuals. I think most of them work for their money, and they deserve to spend it the way they want to, the super PAC people. What is your opinion on that?
Well, I have to disagree with your premise. I don't believe that the television networks are busy working simply for Democrats. And of course, you failed to name Fox, which also clearly leans more Republican. But in any event, some people do believe this is an argument that's been made that people should be allowed to spend as much money as they want on elections. I disagree with that premise. I think regular Americans are not well served when when very few people with huge resources can influence our elections, often for reasons that may not be in the best interest of America. If, for example, an oil company is hugely influencing an election outcome simply because they want to make sure that there's fewer regulations on global warming, that may have a negative impact on all of us and just help that company and a few other oil companies. So really, there could be a lot of hidden motives about why some of these incredibly rich people and corporations may contribute to our elections, and they could, in fact, potentially buy the presidency.
A question over email from Claudia in Georgia asks, what are the rules regarding how much personal money a candidate can contribute to their own campaign? Without outside large donations, rich people like Romney or Hillary Clinton have a distinct advantage.
Rich individuals can contribute unlimited amounts to their own campaigns. There was at one point an attempt to restrict that, and the Supreme Court struck that down. So wealthy people can contribute as much as they want to their own campaigns, and very frequently that is in fact why you will see both the Republicans and the Democrats recruiting candidates for Congress who are wealthy and can help self-finance their campaigns and require the parties to raise less money for them.
And can you go over some of the other limits, since we're on the subject, that the Federal Election Campaign Act lays out for certain candidates?
Well, the Federal Election Commission lays out contribution limits in any election cycle. You can donate to candidates both in the primary and in the general election. Then there are contribution limits on political action committees, which most members of Congress now have, and there are fewer restrictions on how they can spend that money. But the money that it goes into SuperPACs is, of course, the totally unregulated money, and so people would rather now see the money often go into SuperPACs than into anything else.
And a few of the other issues on limits that the Federal Election Campaign Act lays out. The candidates must identify individuals who give them 200 plus in an election cycle. Candidates must disclose expenditures exceeding $200 for any individual or vendor. So all of those are listed in those campaign reports that anybody has access to, correct?
Right. Although let me just say that some of those expenditures are a little problematic because you can often see a candidate list of $5,000 paid to the vendor of American Express, and so, or Visa or MasterCard. So you can often not really know exactly what they spent their money on.
Let's go to Jason on the Independence line from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for C-SPAN. Ms. Sloan, terrific subject. Just a question. Why isn't there, why don't you wait for independents to be part of this board? For crying out loud, I mean, do we lean in this country, our significant agencies on behalf of two parties? Anyhow, I want to go ahead and study your website. Outstanding program. Have a great day.
Thank you. I think you're right that it is a problem that really it's been 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. And although that the way the act is set up, it's the president who is supposed to nominate them. In fact, what it has turned out is the Senate Majority Leader and the Senate Minority Leader really have frequently named the three commissioners that they want. So each side has gotten their 3, and it's really been more people who are very aligned with a political party and have close relationships with the Senate Majority and Minority Leaders. So that has made those people just at the outset more partisan, and I don't think that's really what we'd like to see. I think we really need to see some campaign finance experts who believe in the issue of regulating campaigns fairly and applying the laws to everyone equally.
And can you talk about the status of your petition that you have currently on the White House website and what you're actually asking for in terms of fixing the FEC?
Yeah. So what we're asking is for President Obama to nominate new commissioners to the FEC and replace the 5 commissioners who are sitting on expired terms. We have 14,000 people who have signed the petition so far, and we need a total of 25,000, and we only have till February 10th to get these 25,000 signatures because the White House only gives you a month. So I hope that those of you who are watching and are interested in this issue will go to the White House petition, and you can find it on the website fixthefec.org, and then there's a place that says petitions, and you can sign this petition and add your voice to the call to ask the president to nominate new commissioners. And it's not a Republican or a Democratic issue. It's just an issue of this is a federal agency that we as taxpayers are funding, and it is not doing its job. And we deserve to have an agency out there that we're funding regulating the campaign finance spending.
And as I understand it, your petition needs a certain number of signatures on it before the White House will actually respond to it. Are you close to getting that number?
We need 25,000 signatures, and we have 14,000. We need them in the next few days, but we're very happy to report that Credo is going to be sending out an email to its list today, and they have a very big list. And so I believe we'll be getting more signatures. But
and that will, the White House will then respond on the legal issues that you then bring up?
No, the White House will respond to the question in the petition, which is when will you, President Obama, nominate new commissioners to replace the 5 who have are sitting on expired terms? And we need 25,000 signatures by February 10th in order to accomplish this. So.
A question on Twitter from Matt with the subject that one of the other callers brought up. He asked, can Ms. Sloan comment on how the Democratic and Republican members of the FEC often use unequal enforcement of regulations to harm third parties?
Well, I think what we've really seen is that the commissioners often take the sides of the candidates who are their political party and refuse to enforce the law against the other side. And I think this has been even more of a problem by Don McGahn and a couple of the other Republican commissioners who have flat out said that they believe that their view and their position on the commission is to help Republican candidates. We have seen some really outrageous misconduct by candidate committees that the FEC has refused to take action against. As one caller mentioned earlier, Vern Buchanan is one of those candidates. And here we have an FEC that's really sitting it out. And we, as Americans, are all harmed by this.
Back to the phone. Steve is on the Republicans line from Ashton, Idaho. Good morning. You there, Steve? I think we lost Steve. We'll go to Elizabeth on the Democrats line from Ohio. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you guys doing today?
Good.
Great. I was wondering if Ms. Sloan could speak about the organization ALEC and who belongs to it and one of their, their main reasons of operating. And I was wondering if anything else has happened with the Ensign and Coburn thing back a couple years ago with the payoff of his mistress and him leaving office.
A couple issues, if you can explain what those
Sure.
those all are.
ALEC, and it's the acronym that I can't remember what it stands for at this moment, but ALEC is an organization that works to influence state legislators and works to create legislation in different states around the country, and they often come in and they have a very conservative agenda, and they are funded by corporations mostly who want to see states pass particular legislation. And because state legislators have such little staff themselves, they often will take the legislation ALEC presents and then introduce it into their state's whole cloth. The other issue that you brought up is former Senator John Ensign and the affair he had with his campaign staffer who was married to his chief of staff at the time, and Crew had filed an FEC complaint against Mr. Ensign for paying the former campaign staffer $90,000 as a severance payment. The FEC had refused to act on that finding that perhaps the money had been a gift. The matter was referred back to the Senate to the Department of Justice. It does not appear that the Department of Justice is investigating Mr. Ensign, but Mr. Ensign was forced to resign his seat in the Senate because he was going to be expelled because of his misconduct.
Paul is on the Independence line from Indianapolis, Indiana. Good morning.
Good morning. I had a question about the Citizens United case. As I understood, when I think it was Elena Kagan argued for the government, she said that as law stood then, the government could use the law to silence any corporation, including one that ran a newspaper. As I remember, Citizens United was actually a corporation formed for the sole purpose of making a negative film about Hillary Clinton. Now, did the Supreme Court overreact? Is that what the problem is? Is that they went too far the other direction? Because it doesn't seem to me that, as I recall, they actually took a second cut at it. They actually reconsidered their original decision. So I was wondering if maybe the Supreme Court needs to fine-tune their decision on this.
Yes, in that case, you're right. Citizens United was a nonprofit organization that was it wasn't formed for the specific purpose of running this movie, but it did create a very negative movie about Hillary Clinton. And you're also correct that the case was briefed and argued, and then the Supreme Court decided to have it rebriefed. So they wanted to take another look at it, and they ended up with a much more wide-ranging opinion than was anticipated. And they could have ruled simply on the issue of airing the movie about Hillary Clinton, but that's not what they chose to do. They chose to take this wider view. And I think that is something that the Supreme Court should revisit. I mean, one of the problems in the decision is that Justice Anthony Kennedy, writing for the majority, said that there was no evidence that these kind of independent expenditures that were not coordinated with candidates would have a corrupting influence on our elections. And I think we're seeing that simply isn't the case. And so I think there is room for the Supreme Court to possibly reconsider it, and we may well see that. The Montana Supreme Court recently issued a decision, a very lengthy opinion, talking about how the influence of particularly copper mine corporations had really corrupted the political system in Montana, and they said Citizens United was flat wrong. So the United States Supreme Court may have the opportunity to rule on that Montana decision. So they could fine-tune it, but really it's a question of whether they will. Justice Antonin Scalia, for example, has always said that he feels strongly that there shouldn't be regulations of campaign finances.
Mike on C-SPAN or on Twitter writes, there will be no meaningful campaign reform until there's a constitutional amendment overturning Citizens United and money equals speech. We've got about 10 minutes left with Melanie Sloan, the Executive Director of Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. We'll go back to Mickey on the Democrats line from Norwalk, Connecticut. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for taking my call. Hi, Melanie. Yeah, I've been a 40-year registered Democrat, and right now I'm supporting Republicans, and I really want them to win for 2012. But my big thing, working in the polls as a moderator, I really do think that we need to have voter ID proof of, having that you can vote. And we have to do a lot of work as a moderator to research if the person is qualified or not. And we call our registrar, and of course they got to let them vote because that's the rule, that's the law. And I think that needs to be changed right now for the 2012 election. So I wanted to know about your comments on that, but I would say that the Federal Election Commission is kind of a funny organization, but I think it benefits more the Democrats. And with this Citizens United, I just think that the Republicans didn't do as bad a job as the Democrats are trying to prove that they did.
Mickey from Norwalk, Connecticut.
Well, a couple of things. With post-Citizens United, so far, there's really no question that far more money has rolled into super PACs on the Republican side. I don't think you'd see any dispute about that. President Obama had raised a fair amount of money for his candidate committee and his presidential committee, but the money that's going into the super PACs and to Karl Rove's super PAC is a huge amount of money, and that money in the 2010 congressional midterm elections, super PAC money had a very deleterious effect, obviously, on the Democrats who did not have super PACs raising that kind of money for them. On your issue of voter ID, I disagree with the caller. I think that there's no evidence that these voter ID laws are in fact necessary, and in fact they often discriminate against poor people and young people who don't have the right kind of ID. And I think that there's been no evidence of big problems with voter fraud in this country. I think that's kind of a made-up problem, and I think these efforts to restrict voting to those with government-issued ID is really a way to restrict voting, and I think it's very troublesome.
We talked before about Stephen Colbert bringing some attention to this issue. I want to get your thoughts on another well-known figure bringing attention to this issue. This is from today's Washington Post. It says, look who's crusading for campaign finance reform, and it's a story about fallen super lobbyist Jack Abramoff. He was at the liberal advocacy group Public Citizen yesterday talking about his efforts as a lobbyist. And he says, I was involved deeply in the system of bribery, legalized bribery for the most part, illegal bribery, unfortunately for me, somewhat. And that system, which I took advantage of, which I also took for granted, as do many of those still in it, still to a large part exists today. What do you think about Jack Abramoff being a spokesman for campaign finance reform?
You know, it's interesting. I also have met with Jack Abramoff and talked to him. He seems quite sincere about his belief that there are these problems and that he's a good spokesman to talk about the problems and how they need to be fixed. But I think it is, Mr. Abramoff is right when he talks about the issue that basically we do have a system of legalized bribery. This is something that is a problem separate and apart from Citizens United. Members of Congress are constantly doing what we call dialing for dollars. From the minute they win their election, particularly in a House seat, members have to constantly be out there fundraising in order to run the ads that are going to be necessary for them to maintain their seats. And the people who are most likely to give these members money are lobbyists and members of trade associations who want something from them. So you inevitably will see legislation traded for campaign contributions. We've seen something particularly egregious recently. Former Senator Christopher Dodd, who used to say he had never taken a campaign contribution to do anything and was offended that anyone would suggest he might have taken any action in return for a campaign contribution, recently, in his new role as a lobbyist for the Motion Picture Association, basically said, when he was very upset about some recent legislation, a bill called SOPA, he said, well, you know, people should watch out. His campaign contributions were really going to dry up if they weren't supporting his issues. So here he was now on the other side admitting that the campaign contributions have a huge impact and that those who weren't supporting his issues in his way were going to not receive those campaign contributions.
Let's go to Barb on the Republicans line from Commerce, Michigan. Go ahead, Barb.
Yes, I'd like to find out, Ms. Sloan, if it's all right for President Barack Obama to receive $10 million from George Soros, and where are you getting your money?
It's not okay for President Obama to get $10 million from George Soros. There are contribution limits on his presidential committee. And so that he couldn't accept $10 million from Mr. Soros or anybody else. Similarly, he does have this super PAC, Priorities USA, which is not coordinated with Mr. Obama, just like Mitt Romney is technically not coordinating with his super PAC, Restore Our Future. But anybody could contribute any amount of money to the super PAC. I'm not aware that Mr. Soros has made any contribution to the super PAC, and I believe in the New York Times article you were referring to earlier, Mr. Soros has not made any contribution yet. He has, in fact, said that he believes Mr. Obama and Mr. Romney are very much one and the same, and there's not a particular difference between them, so it's not clear what he's doing in this election.
And if you want to talk about Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, where you get your funding from to do your work?
CREW gets its funding from, we're a 501c3 organization, and we get our funding from people who support our mission and foundations who support our mission.
And what is your budget for the year, and how much does it usually cost to put in these complaints and keep an eye on the FEC?
CREW's budget is about $2.8 million a year. It costs a fair amount of money to file these FEC complaints. We also file complaints with the Department of Justice, the Internal Revenue Service, lots of ethics complaints with the House Office of Congressional Ethics and the Senate Ethics Committee. We also engage in a lot of litigation using the Freedom of Information Act in order to obtain documents from federal agencies.
Well, the FEC's, since we're talking budgets, the FEC's budget was about $67 million. Quickly here, because the House is about to come in, do you think the FEC has enough funds to do its job?
I don't think right now the FEC's problem is a matter of money, it's a matter of will. The FEC simply isn't doing its job, and we need new commissioners promptly installed to make sure that this 2012 election is handled fairly and thoroughly.
Melanie Sloan, Executive Director of CREW, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.